According to researchers from the University of Texas at Austin, employees who reside at high-trust organizations are 50% more productive and report 106% more energy at work compared to those who are in low-trust workplaces. Meanwhile, the science of human connection continues to shape our conversations and biology. Meanwhile, researchers from the Pacific Neuroscience Institute explain that the love, trust, attachment, and social bonding are driven by intricate interactions between neurotransmitters and hormones and natural pathways which influence the way we think, feel, and collaborate and lead. Today I'm joined by my friend Keith Greer. He has spent more than 4 decades guiding families, individuals, organizations, and leaders better understand the power of conversation and connection. He's an executive coach, family therapist, trainer, professional speaker, and podcast host. He also brings together neuroscience, leadership, and emotional intelligence and leadership development to help leaders and organizations create cultures which are rooted in trust, safety, inclusion, and authentic communication. He holds a professional certified coach designation through the International Coach Federation. He works across corporate nonprofits and family business sectors, helping leaders develop conversational strategies which help to strengthen relationships, increase engagement, and inspire meaningful and long-lasting, sustainable performance. Its conversationally intelligent leadership process integrates evidence-based practices from conversational intelligence, psychological safety, positive psychology, motivational interviewing, and family systems theory. The result is a leading framework which empowers leaders, organizations, and teams to communicate with greater empathy, clarity, trust, and authenticity. And Greer joined me this week to tell me more. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. If you're ready, my friend, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program. And I'm super excited to talk to you about conversations, neuroscience, and inclusion, my friend. Happy Friday to you. It's great to see you this morning. Thanks so much for being here.
It's good to see you. Good to be here. Always love being in this conversation we're about to have.
Absolutely. So, Keith, I wanted to start our conversation by asking you about your 4 decades of experience as an executive coach, a family therapist, a trainer, and podcaster. I know that you've got a depth of perspective when it comes to what What patterns have you consistently seen when people build or break relationships? My friend, tell me about your experience with relationships and communication, my friend. What do you want people to know?
Well, first of all, the 4 decades of experience, Kevin and I have been blessed. I have had a phenomenal career to this time. I say in the helping world, but I've been able to do some different kinds of conversations in the helping world, from clinical social work to school social work to family therapy. Now, much more so in the executive coaching leadership realm. What I've seen over the years is that we make assumptions about how conversations work or don't work that are, as often is the case with assumptions, false assumptions. We are quick to blame, we are quick to simplify, especially when conversations between two people don't go well. So the example I always give is if you and I had maybe we just met and we started a conversation and that conversation didn't go well and we both walked away from it really annoyed at each other. If somebody walked up to both of us at that moment and asked, all right, give me your best explanation as to why, Keith, your conversation with Kevin didn't go well. The tendency on the part of all of us humans would be for me to say, well, Kevin is a so-and-so. That's the explanation. And so I walk away blaming, and I walk away not at all being curious about my part of it. What conversational intelligence allows us to do is to come up with a much better, relevant, science-based explanation for why some conversations work, cause us to feel connected and move forward, and some conversations do not.
Yeah, absolutely. And Keith, I'm curious to ask you about how you think conversational intelligence and neuroscience can help heal our divisions in society today. Because in some measure, Keith, I think we've lost our ability to communicate without being defensive. So how do you think conversational intelligence can help us get back to a common good of conversations where we can have respectful conversations and still disagree at the same time? What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Yeah, great question. I think about this all the time. The woman who created conversational intelligence, her name was Judith Glaser. And sadly, Judith passed a number of years ago. And before she passed, I had the privilege, absolute privilege, to train with her for about a year. And when I first started to learn about conversational intelligence, Judith used to talk about this all the time, that while this is a modality that you very much see in the executive coaching world and the leadership world, this is a modality that can benefit anybody who is in a relationship with another human being and or wants to have productive conversations. So to your point, I agree with you wholeheartedly. We seem to have progressed to a place where it feels almost impossible to have a productive, respectful, informational conversation with someone when we disagree. Some of that is where I think in a space, especially in our society, where we are disagreeing about things where both people feel very strongly, passionately about their perspective, their beliefs. None of that has to get in the way of having a really good conversation. So what neuroscience can teach us is if we enter conversations and our primary goal is to convince, Kevin, I'm going to convince you to think like me, and or once you express your opinions and they are different than mine, I'm going to demonize you as a human being for having those opinions. Neuroscience tells us that that is a road to nowhere. What it will cause in both of our brains is for a certain level of fight flight to kick in, because our brain will perceive each other as threat. And this is a really important point and part of conversational intelligence. Our brain, its primary process, its primary responsibility is to keep us safe. And so multiple times a second, our brain is scanning our world looking for threat. Now, a million years ago, that threat maybe was a dinosaur who was looking to make us their lunch. Well, today, our brain scans our relational world, our emotional world, our self-concept world, our social media world, our opinions of others about us world, looking for threat. And if it perceives threat, the exact same neurochemical cascade happens in our brain as it did a million years ago. And so when we approach each other I call it a push. I'm going to push you to think like me, or I'm going to judge you for not. There is no way those conversations will be productive. What can be productive, and I am not saying this is easy because I feel my feelings and opinions just as deeply as anybody else,
Sure.
is how can I approach a conversation with curiosity? How can I approach a conversation where I listen before I'm worried about telling what I think? How can I approach a conversation and hear maybe, Kevin, your opinion about something is radically different than mine, and I listen to it, and just because it's different doesn't mean either one of us is right or wrong. Mm-hmm. How can I approach a conversation knowing that we might have to walk away and say we agree to disagree? There are strategies that we can use and that we can teach people if they're interested that would allow us to have these conversations and not have the experience that most of us are having now, which is I don't even want to have conversations with people because they all seem to be going sideways.
Well, that should be the moniker outside of U.S. politics these days. No, I'm only kidding.
I'm with you.
I'm only kidding. But as you mentioned, Keith, research tells us that our brain, when we are in a state of trust, it activates our reward system and
Yes.
reduces the threat level. And I'm curious to ask you about, our oxytocin and cortisol regulation and how do you translate the scientific insights into practical everyday conversations that create safe and inclusive relationships. What are your thoughts there, my friend?
So you hit on the two main neurochemicals, and there are more than that, but those are the ones that we can really focus on. And this is very much a component of the modality of conversational intelligence. Can we interact with each other in a manner that actually, in real time, upticks the production of oxytocin in our brains? So many people hear that about the neurochemical or neuropeptide oxytocin as very much connected to childbirth. It is the chemical that is coursing through a new mom's body shortly after she gives birth that ensures that she bonds with her child, even in spite of the rigors of bringing that child into the world. We know that oxytocin has everything to do with moments that we feel connected to people. And so, if I ask people often when I do some training to think about the last time they were in a phenomenal conversation, one where they felt safe, where they could share with each other, where there was a back and forth going on. And what I say to them is, as creepy as this sounds, if I could walk up to you at that moment and draw some of your blood, we would find a whole lot of oxytocin. Flip side, you mentioned cortisol. It is the stress hormone. So as soon as my brain perceives threat, cortisol is cruising through my body because it is one of the main chemicals that gets me ready for fight, flight, freeze, appease. Right? Those threat responses that we all have gets my body revved up, ready to go, and keeps me safe. And so from just if we look at those two neurochemicals, we can get very curious about what interactions can I have with you and you with me that increases the production of oxytocin. So interactions like showing empathy, showing compassion. This sounds so simple, Kevin, but it's really not, because this is a really challenging thing for most of us human beings to do. If I feel listened to, truly, authentically listened to, my brain loves that, right? That's going to produce oxytocin. Authenticity, right? We all have a wonderful BS meter as human beings. We know when we're in front of somebody who's real and somebody who's not. When I'm in front of somebody who I perceive as authentic, oxytocin goes up. And here's a really good one, because this is relevant to anyone, very relevant in the leadership world. So one of the a really powerful conversational strategy, although again, difficult to do depending upon who you are, your life experience, who you're in a conversation with, is to demonstrate vulnerability. I don't know. Maybe I messed up. You tell me, right? And so in leadership, where sometimes leaders view it as I'm all knowing, right? My way or the highway, showing vulnerability, and this is specific to the leadership world. When a leader demonstrates vulnerability in front of their team, I don't know, I messed up, what do you think, right? I want to hear from you, shows vulnerability, it actually increases the production of oxytocin in those that witness that act of vulnerability. And yet, Kevin, I'm in that conversation all the time with leaders, especially men, who have such a struggle going there and allowing themselves to be vulnerable. But it is a powerful conversational strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. And building on that point, Keith, I want to talk to you about psychological safety within organizations, because, you know, we often view it as a key driver of high performing teams, as you know. And I'm curious, in your work, how do you define a safe conversation, and how do you get leaders to understand, you know, the observable behaviors that signal a safety and presence in conversations? What are your thoughts there, my friend?
So, psychological safety is incredibly important. Nothing happens. I would make the argument, Kevin, nothing happens for me as a human being in terms of my relationship with other human beings, and maybe in the workplace, if I think about being a member of a team. I believe nothing productive happens if there is not psychological safety, if I do not feel safe around the people. And I realize that and this is also, I think, one of the things I enjoy the most about conversational intelligence, because it is so science-based. Again, I hear this all the time in some of my work. Well, Keith, this all sounds good. It's kind of, you know, touchy-feely, social worky, but is it, you know, really relevant to the workplace? Let's talk about innovation, right? So I'm a part of a team and we need to innovate. Well, innovation is potentially a vulnerable making process, because it means sharing ideas, and maybe mine don't get used, or I throw out an idea and you're a member of the team and you come up with something else. And so for us to innovate as a team, we have to feel a level of trust with each other and safety with each other, emotional safety with each other, or we will be limited in what we talk about. And I think if there is one place where time is wasted in the workplace, it is in team meetings or group meetings, because rarely, if ever, has any conversation happened about how do we want to do this conversation together so that people can be their best, share, take risks, be vulnerable. That's never talked about. And so inevitably, in any team meeting, you will have people around the table who don't share anything because they don't want to take the risk, they don't feel safe. You will have the person around the table who, in the conversational intelligence world, we call it the addiction of being right. I'm right, you're wrong, which completely closes down conversation. And so this piece about trust and safety in the workplace is paramount. The last thing I'll say about it, Kevin, is if you Google the top 3 to 5 reasons why people leave jobs, inevitably, somewhere in that top 3 to 5 reasons, the wording might be different, there is did not feel valued and appreciated, toxic work environment. Mm-hmm. People are not leaving, and I don't minimize compensation. We all have bills to pay. That is not why people leave jobs. They leave because there is a lack of psychological safety. It might not be called that. And they might not think in those terms, but that's what they're talking about.
Yeah, and Keith, I'm curious to ask you about the nonprofit, profit, and business sector. I am on the board of directors for my Habitat for Humanity in my hometown, and today, in nonprofit world, communication is more important than ever before, and I'm curious, based on societal commitments and designations today, the giving to the nonprofit and family-owned business sector can sometimes be spotty at best. So I'm curious to ask you about conversational or communicational breakdowns happening today within nonprofit or family business sectors, and what science-based or neuroscience-based strategies can we use to repair them in your view, my friend?
I'm going to separate those two a little bit. So my experience in the not-for-profit world is, I think there's a couple of things that are challenging to the not-for-profit world. You just hit on a big one, right? There's a not-for-profit that I do a lot of leadership coaching work for right now. I mean, just finding the money to keep the doors open is such a stress, a daily stress for the executive director and her team. And so what do we know about, right, the ask for money? Right? The ask for money needs to be a relational ask. And so training people in the not-for-profit world how to approach, and I think people in the not-for-profit world who do this part of the work are very, very good at it. But to think in terms of, how do I do this relationship? How do I get to know this person? How do I not just walk in and say, open up your wallet? These are all really, really important skills for not-for-profit folks to have. Now, in terms of the organization itself, I would make the argument that your point a moment ago about psychological safety is, I don't know, in some ways even more important than not-for-profit world, because for the most part, the compensation in the not-for-profit world is less than the corporate world. And so the people who are working there, who are fully aware and they're making their own choices to work in the not-for-profit world, from my conversations there is even more of an emphasis on, I need to make sure that I'm in a workplace that feels really, really comfortable to me, where I know that I am valued and appreciated for the work that I do. And and this is a key component, Kevin, of psychological safety, that I am valued and appreciated simply because I'm a human being and I exist. Not that I'm valued and appreciated because of the technical skill I bring. It's got to start with that people respect me simply because I breathe. And that is a key component, again, maybe a little bit more, I see as an important point in the not-for-profit world. In the family-owned business world, the aspects of conversational intelligence, psychological safety are so important because family-owned businesses, oh my, you want to talk about relational complexity, right? You have people in a room who are constantly walking the intersection of good business practices and our family stuff, because we all walk around with family stuff, family legacy, history, loyalty, family loyalty. I always say that family loyalty is one of the most powerful forces in the universe. It can be a force for good, or it can be a division force. Helping families who are in business together have really important business conversations, as well as being curious about the role of family and family history in these business decisions, requires significant psychological safety and really, really high conversational skills.
Yeah, absolutely. And Keith, I wanted to talk to you about something that I think is very important, and that's your framework to work with these leaders. Your leadership framework on conversationally intelligent leadership process, it integrates approaches that are conversational intelligence. Positive psychology is also part of it. Motivational interviewing and family systems. So I'm curious to ask you about your framework, my friend, and how it strengthens things like discipline and how having people come together, and why do you think it is the integration that is so powerful that brings people together? So tell me about your framework, my friend.
So I am very specific, Kevin, about the kind of work I do, and my kind of where I land in the larger world of executive coaching. So, like I say, if you're if you're looking to hire me because you're in leadership and you want to work on your strategic thinking or something like that, I'm probably not your dude. Like that's not my jam. My jam is conversations and relationships. Now, I would argue as a leader, I don't know where else you go if you don't start there, but that's my bias about my work and about the leadership world. So as I was doing more and more of this work and being asked, whether to coach a leader or do some training around some ideas on better leadership, more productive leadership, I just started bringing together some concepts that I've had the opportunity over the years to work with. So again, a lot of it is grounded in this conversational intelligence. When you look at, you mentioned another one, psychological safety is in there. The positive psychology world, oh my gosh, the guidance it gives us in how to be strength-based with people. Right? There is no evidence whatsoever that people grow if the leaders in their life constantly tell them what they're not doing well. There's great evidence that people grow when the leaders in their life are a loud voice constantly highlighting what is going well, what their strengths are, their positive attributes and positive characteristics. And my experience in general with human beings, Kevin, is if you ask most people to make a list of what their strengths are, they often don't know what to say because we're just not asked that. So so the positive psychology world guides us in that area. Motivational interviewing comes more out of the clinical world and specifically out of the addiction world. It's a modality that was created, 20, 25 years ago to guide us in how to have productive conversations when we're working with someone who's maybe struggling with active addiction. And we know that one of the hallmarks of active addiction is often this ambivalence response, like I want to change, I don't want to change, I want to change, I don't want to change. So what's really cool is you're now seeing books being written about how to bring motivational interviewing into the workplace, because what motivational interviewing guides us in is how to be in conversations with people to help them find their motivation. One of the false narratives in the leadership world is that leaders are supposed to motivate, quote unquote, motivate their employees. There is not a shred of evidence I see in the research that says it is possible to motivate another human being, because motivation is an internal process. I can engage with someone in a way that helps them discover what they're motivated to do or not do. And the challenge sometimes for leaders is somebody might not be motivated to do what the leader would like, but I would argue if they're not motivated, they're not going to do it. And so motivational interviewing for leaders is a powerful, powerful conversational strategy. So what I've done is put all of this together, and here's another kind of general message that I give leaders about my work if they want to work with me. I believe that at the end of the day, leadership is nothing more than a relationship. It is a relationship between the leader and their team and the people on their team. In that relationship, there are some things that cause it to work or not work, right? From a relationship standpoint. And so for me, one of the most important aspects of a leader working on leadership is for them to be willing to work on their self-awareness. Where do they get stuck? With what kind of person? In what kind of conversation? Leadership stuck points for me rarely have anything to do with not knowing a certain technique. It's usually our own stuff. If I have certain people on my team that I seem to relate really easily with, and I have certain people on my team that it's harder, let's get curious about what that is. And especially if the leader has experiences with people on their team that where conversations or relationships don't go well, I challenge leaders to look inward. What is this about for you? Because it's a much more, I would argue, a much more productive conversation than simply pointing a finger, saying, somebody's a so-and-so, I'm not responsible for it, I don't need to think about it, maybe I even get them off my team. So putting all of those modalities together, I have found to be just so helpful in this overarching conversation with leaders about their own self-awareness that they bring to their leadership.
Yeah, and Keith, I want to talk to you about leadership and authenticity because, I often say that, employees can often, cut their leadership authenticity from their bosses with a butter knife if it's not authentic. And, research from Salesforce tells us that, studies that employees feel heard 4.6 more percent of the time if they feel empowered and valued by their bosses. So I'm curious to ask you about your perspective on leadership and authenticity, and how you think it's related to both deeply effective loyalty, trust, and trustworthy communication. What are your thoughts there, my friend?
I said a little bit earlier, and I believe this, that human beings in general, we are really skilled at perceiving when we are in front of somebody that doesn't feel real. It's interesting, Kevin, because I get asked this often, especially by people who are new in leadership, about, Keith, what's a good leadership book to read? And I think reading different kinds of books and perspectives on leadership is incredibly helpful and valuable. But what I say to people is, okay, so go read this book. Your responsibility, your charge, is to take the concepts in the book and figure out how to have them come out of you sounding like you. Mm-hmm. Because if I wrote a leadership book, you'd get leadership according to Keith Greer, right? This is just my take. It is not the be all and end all. It's just my take. And so the challenge for leaders is, how do I do leadership? How do I take concepts, skills, experiences, suggestions from other folks, things I read, trainings I've gone to, and have it come out of me sounding like me? Because I would make, your question is so on point, Kevin, I would make the argument that if it is not coming out sounding like you, you're going to really struggle in leadership. People will perceive that. They will read that. Authenticity it's just such a powerful conversational strategy. It's such a powerful human connection strategy that when I interact with you, I don't find myself guessing, wondering what your motivations are, right? Trying to read too much into what you say, because I feel like I'm in front of a real person. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean there might be times I don't agree with you or we disagree vehemently. But even those kinds of challenging conversations are less challenging if we perceive each other as real. And so it is such an important point. And I think especially for people who are new in leadership, I work quite a bit with emerging leaders. Either they're getting ready for their first leadership role or they're in their first leadership role. This is a huge part of the conversation. Because here's the other way to think about it, that where authenticity is relevant. So, I have opportunities, I've had opportunities to train new coaches. And one of the things that I always talk about with coaches in learning how to coach is coaching is a language-based endeavor. So I want, you and any of your listeners to think about anytime they've ever tried to learn a new language, right? When you try and learn a new language, it feels like you're working so hard, like your brain is on overdrive, trying to think about how to say what I want to say in this new language. I think there's something similar in coaching or in counseling because we are so language based. And so one of the goals is to get to a point in your career and in your skill where you embody coaching. It just kind of flows out of you, right? You no longer have to think about every word that comes out. There's something I think similar in leadership, because leadership also is a language-based endeavor, a relational-based endeavor. So for leaders who are new, they often find themselves thinking and overthinking everything that's about to come out of their mouth. And then that sometimes comes across as not authentic. And so these authenticity and just time, right? Giving yourself time to learn these skills and to learn how to kind of settle in and be yourself, it is so important. And the best leaders, the most powerful, effective leaders, they lead in a way that is authentic to them.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Keith, as you and I both know, podcasts are one of the most effective way in this modern world to talk about communication. And I know that you have a podcast called The Helping Communication, where you focus on the art and science of building trust one conversation at a time. So let's talk about your podcast, my friend, and some of the most transformational conversational shifts you've seen, and what you want people to know about interacting and change, and your podcast in general, my friend.
So the podcast is called The Helping Conversation, and in great clarity, I stopped doing it a couple of years ago. It was just a function of time, of not having enough time. My goal is to get back to it. I so enjoyed the conversations I had. So I came up with this concept of, what's a helping conversation? And I wanted the podcast to be more than interviewing traditional helping people, counselors, therapists, psychologists, coaches, right? And so I started thinking about a helping conversation as any conversation that really essentially helps people move forward in their lives. And that a helping conversation can come from so many different kinds of people. So over the course of several seasons, I did interview your traditional coaches and counselors and therapists. And those are wonderful conversations. And the other thing about the podcast, Kevin, is what I asked people to do is to be ready to come on and talk a little bit about the science behind what they do. Because that's just so fascinating to me for all of us to think about what's the evidence behind that supports that what I do, I should be doing, or that other people do it. Mm. So it started with, some of my colleagues in the helping world, but then over the course of the few seasons I did it, I interviewed clergy, and I interviewed a pastor and a rabbi. I interviewed, one of my favorite interviews, quite honestly, was my sister. Although she retired about a year ago, my sister carved out a very successful career in the financial management world, and which is so relational, right? You want to talk about a topic that most people won't talk about. It's their money, right? So, I have colleagues who are in that field, and presently I have a client who's a very successful money manager. We talk all the time about the relational aspect of what he does. Yes, there's the technical aspect, but it's relational, first and foremost. I interviewed, CEOs and one in particular, a gentleman by the name of Mike Mandina, who is since retired he founded a company up here in the Rochester area called Optimax, which has become a 500-person internationally successful a company that makes high-end optics, like Department of Defense and NASA. And Mike, when I talk to Mike, I always feel like I'm potentially in front of Steve Jobs. He is so relational in how he thought about building his company, an incredibly technically advanced company, but the relational aspect was always so important to him. I talked to a police officer. He was a recently retired chief of police of what he brought to his work in helping the members of the town where he was the police chief. I so loved it. It saddened me having to put it to the side just because, again, I got busy in some other aspects of my life, and I will return to it. But I think it was just such a cool experience to talk to all these different kinds of folks. Of a cousin who's a very successful real estate person. We talked with her about what goes into that conversation. Right, talk about one of the biggest purchases anybody makes in their life, a house, and the vulnerability that comes with that. So it's still out there, on the podcast platforms if people are interested. Just some phenomenal people who shared how they help the people in their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Keith, I want to transition to my bailiwick and what I am most passionate about talking about. And that's people with disabilities in the workforce, my friend. Our friends at Statistics Canada tell us that only about 59% of people with disabilities participate in today's modern workforce compared to higher rates of people with non-disabilities. Now, I am passionate about this, Keith, because I have cerebral palsy, and I believe that people with disabilities are natural problem solvers, but as you know, their participation in the workforce is slim to none in a lot of sectors, my friend. So I'm curious to ask you, from your perspective, how can people with disabilities actively strengthen the psychological safety of organizations if they're given a chance to be integrated at a more rapid pace? What are your thoughts there, my friend?
So now I'm going to make an assumption here, Kevin, and you can tell me whether this assumption is on point or not. I guess my assumption is, just even sitting here and talking with you, as somebody who has been challenged with a form of a disability throughout his life, I would imagine it has caused you to do some serious thinking about how you want to be, about the world you would love to be in, about how to voice what those expectations are. It is easy for me to sit here and say that for a person with a disability walking into a workplace who is focused on psychological safety, that they need to be willing to voice that. Now, I realize that in some workplaces is much easier said than done. There are workplaces that I think are really open to that conversation. And I think the reality is there are some workplaces that are not. And then probably somewhere in the middle is those that would say they are open to it, but I don't know if they are. So, advocacy, right, of being willing to walk in and advocate for what you need, and being able to advocate in a really skilled way, because, and you would know this better than I advocating in a way that is, for the most part, that is really loud or perceived as, you're in my face, or ends up not being productive. I can't imagine how challenging it is to walk into a workplace where you are in the minority in terms of physical abilities and advocate for what you need. I think, again, there's great conversational skill that can be brought to that conversation of how do I advocate for myself in a way that is relational in orientation, that I'm trying to build relationships. I'm not just walking into HR and saying, here's what I need. Because while it might be incredibly relevant what you need, we just know there's certain ways of coming at that conversation that prove not productive, right? Versus how do I build, if I'm in this new work environment, how do I build the relationships strategically? Look, I always say one of the greatest skills in the workplace is understanding how to work with personality and politics. Now, some people would say, well, isn't that kind of manipulative? I would argue it's not manipulative. I think it's a reality in the workplace. There's personality and politics. And knowing how to work with those in a way that is still authentic to you, isn't manipulative, but keeps an eye on what do I need? What do I need in this workplace? What do I need from my direct supervisor? What do I need from the people on my team to be at my best? Because I want to think at the end of the day, Kevin, if for any human being walking into a new workplace, a part of the skill that is helpful, would be helpful to them, is to be able to advocate for what they need to be their best. Now, what you need to be your best could be radically different than what I need, but I think there's relevance and commonality to that conversation. And yet what I see, and this is not in any way, shape, or form about a person with a disability. I see this all over the place, because going back to the start of our conversation this morning of identifying that us human beings seem to struggle having productive conversations, I see this all the time in the workplace where somebody has a need, but their way of going about voicing that need is so not productive that they don't get what they need. And so, boy, working on those skills, on those conversational advocacy skills, is just would feel so important to me.
Yeah, and Keith, I also wanted to talk to you about encouraging dissent within organizations because Google's Project Aristotle found that the best teams actively encourage diverse viewpoints, as we were just discussing, and I'm curious to ask you, what specific techniques do you coach leaders to use when you want them to, invite differing opinion without creating conflict? My friend, why do you think it's important to encourage dissenting viewpoints in order to solve problems? What are your thoughts there, my friend?
So first of all, the Google project you just mentioned, I love that you mentioned that. In a training I do around conversational intelligence, I talk about that project, right, and the findings in that project of what produced the greatest, most productive, most effective teams at Google, right, which was this diversity. So look, I think for a leader, there's a couple of things I think of. First of all, to produce that kind of team, to foster that kind of team, one of the first things a leader has to think about is how to be, whether it's to lead with humility, or sometimes people they talk about the concept of servant leadership, where you're not the star, right? You are not the person with all the answers. You're not the person always at the front of the room. You are fostering that in your team. And that does not mean that you don't, as the leader, bring your skills and experiences and talents, but it is secondary. It is secondary to how do I shine the light, the spotlight, so to speak, on the members of my team versus on me. So I think that's one of the first things that we often talk about, because again, to this day, here in 2026, there are some of the oldest, I would say, antiquated narratives about what leaders are supposed to do continue to be alive and well, which is, again, tell, sell, yell, convince, coerce, control. I'm the person. I'm never wrong. So helping leaders, especially new leaders, view this as, no, you're in the shadows. You're supporting this team. You are not the person who's necessarily front and center, is first and foremost. I think so. One of the skills I teach is something called having a conversation about the conversation. So I mentioned before that my experience tells me that most team meetings in the workplace are a waste of however many minutes it took to have that meeting, because people aren't speaking their truth because they don't feel safe and they don't necessarily trust some of the people around the table. So what a conversation about the conversation is, let's say as a team, having a conversation about how do we want to interact with each other? How do we, when we get together, want to make sure that everyone around the table has an opportunity to share? This is a fascinating conversation because people often don't know how to answer this at first. What does trust, safety, and a sense of inclusion look like, sound like, and feel like to you and to me, right? So, because if there's 10 of us on our team, Kevin, and we're all sitting around the table, the conference table, every single one of us has some differences in what we're looking for in the room, I say, that would be indications, oh, this is a trusting, safe place. I can take a risk. I can ask a question. I can throw out an idea, not being sure if it's even right or wrong. So we can talk about trust and safety. We can talk about, all right, what if we're having a conversation as a team and conflict does come in the room? People disagree. There's nothing about conversational intelligence or psychological safety that means conflict never happens. In fact, these two concepts are most powerful when there is conflict, when there is disagreement in the room, because there's ways to have that happen and not feel judged, not demonize people, not stop listening. It's just, we disagree. Let's explore this a little bit further. So all of these kinds of strategies can be facilitated by the leader that increases the productivity of every conversation the leader has with individuals on the team or when the team has a conversation together.
Yeah, and Keith, I'm gonna combine my last two questions because they're sort of interconnected, and I wanted to ask you about psychologically safe environments, as we've talked about, and the relationship between good and bad failure, because I believe, and I know that you believe, that sometimes failing miserably can lead to innovation. And I'm curious to ask you how you help teams distinguish between good failure, learning driven, and bad failure due to negligence, my friend, and how you respond appropriately to each. And then my final question for you is about your own personal and professional legacy and how you want that to be defined.
Okay. So, awesome question about failure. This sounds very trite, but I love this. So if you think of the word fail, F-A-I-L, first attempt in learning. I love that, right? Like that just resonates with me because it is such a great topic, Kevin, because again, failure. All right. So let's think of failure or I made a mistake. For most of us human beings, that's an incredibly vulnerable moment. I would make the argument psychologically that when I fail, I do something in the workplace and I made a mistake or I broke something or I've been working on this project and it ends up going nowhere, that failure, a sense of failure, often takes us back to some of the earliest experiences in our life with significant authority figures and how they interacted with us when we weren't perfect. So it's a scary place for a lot of human beings. Your point, though, is right on. Innovation does not happen without failure. It just doesn't happen. And so how a leader and how a team talks about how do we want to respond to failure? How can we view it as learning, a requirement of really good innovation? How can we create an environment with our team where there is such safety, there is such a level of trust that people can take the risk to innovate? Because inherent in that risk is the first thing I throw out, the first idea, the first concept might not be it. And I see it, and especially in companies where there's, again, I can talk about this company that makes optics. The fear in that company that I'm going to break a piece of glass, but they do such high-end work, stuff like that's going to happen. And so that is so much on the leader and the team and so related to everything we have talked about this morning, to set up that kind of environment where, not that maybe failure is ever going to feel radically comfortable to somebody, but it's okay. It's not a black mark. It's not a sign that you're not highly competent. It's inherent to the innovation process. And companies who don't innovate don't stick around. And so they need to figure out how to help their workforce rethink, reconceptualize what it means to fail, quote unquote. My legacy. That's an awesome question, Kevin. Thank you for asking me that. No one's ever asked me that in my time on being a guest on people's podcasts. My legacy. I want my legacy to be. I'm blessed. I have 2 children. I have 3 grandsons. I've been married to my wife Carol for 2026 for 43 years. Just hit 43 years. I want my legacy to start there in terms of what family has meant to me, and my interaction and how I love those people and how they love me. I want it to start there. Professionally, again, I mentioned when we started that I've had this very blessed 44-year career working with different populations of people. And I just want to be remembered as somebody who cared, as somebody who sees the best in people. I want to be remembered as somebody who, and I'm not 100% with this, who doesn't judge others, right? Who gives people grace, because I like to think most of the time I try and give myself that same level of grace. Maybe at the end of the day, just somebody who attempted to make the world a bit better of a place, a bit loving of a place, a bit inclusive and diverse place. I think it would be somewhere in there. That would be my hope. That's how people think about me when they think about me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Keith, I want to first of all, before I bid you adieu, my friend, how can people get in contact with you if they want to explore all the great work that you're doing, my friend?
So 2 different ways. They can go to my website. I have a very simple website, but it's a way to get in touch with me, and that's keithgreercoaching.com. Can drop me an email. It's keith@keithgreercoaching.com. And what I'll say to your listeners, Kevin, is, for the first 5 of your listeners who, if you have listeners who want to reach out, for the first 5 of your listeners who reach out and let me know that, they listen to this specific podcast, I will, I'll schedule a 1-hour complimentary coaching session with you. And we can look at how to bring conversational intelligence into your personal world. Maybe there's a certain relationship, family relationship that you're really struggling with, or maybe explore a little bit of how this could be relevant to you in your professional life, whether as a leader or just as a member of a team. So again, to the first 5 who reach out to me, let me know that you listened to this specific episode with the 2 of us, and we can find a time to connect.
Well, that's fabulous. I do appreciate that, my friend. And I want to thank you for all the great work that you're doing in conversationally intelligent conversations to elevate both professional and personal ambitions, my friend. I think it's great work. I find you to be a fascinating person, and I want to thank you for engaging in conversation with me this morning. It's most appreciated.
Well, Kevin, I feel the same. Thank you so much for the invite. Questions were phenomenal and thoroughly enjoyed my time with you.